Hi, my name's Phil. Welcome to the Political Postbox, where we look at some of the more engaged comments on the videos on the channel from the past week and have a look at them in a bit more detail. But first, if you'd like to get notifications of daily news and political commentary, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So let's get into the first one, which is about the lack of Brexit planning in the UK, which is fairly stark. It says here, the lack of planning for Brexit was and is breathtaking, and now the Brexit chickens are coming home to roost. Good luck with that. You have my sympathies. And on one hand, it may look like that because various EU countries have been making very serious preparations for, 2 or 3 years now, whereas the UK hasn't. The UK keeps saying it is, but ultimately what is going to be on day one of a no-deal Brexit, and remember, the government at no point, whether it was Theresa May's government or Boris Johnson's government, at no point have ever said we will not leave without a deal. And in fact, when you look at Boris Johnson's direction of travel, it is very much towards no deal. I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen at the end of 2020, but it's very much on the cards. And you would think if you are going to be serious about leaving without a deal, then you'd need to prepare for it. And the most immediately obvious effect of a no-deal Brexit is going to be delays at the borders, because we are, according to people, hauliers and people who work on the border, we are going to see literally a hundredfold increase in the number of vehicles that will need checks. And that means we have to expand our border facilities massively. It's not necessarily realistic to expand them 100 times, so there's going to be more delays than there would be now. But unless you want there to be delays of whole days, which is ruinous, you're going to need to massively expand them. And that hasn't been done. And it can't now be done in time. That's what the civil service keep trying to say to the government. You now do not have time to do this by the end of 2020. You should have been doing this for the past few years. And there are various other aspects as well. So, yes, we haven't been doing checks. But the reason for that has been political. And it's because if you do that, you are basically saying that no deal is going to happen. And they keep trying to tell people that we're going to get a great deal. There is also potentially an element in that the people in charge, the ministers, are arrogant enough to believe that they are going to get a deal. Despite everything, they may still, it's very difficult to know. It's very difficult to bring yourself down to the intellectual level where you could believe that without agreeing to any rules, we can get fully unfettered access to the EU single market. But they may believe that still. So it is going to be a huge problem if we go down that line. And ultimately what has to happen is, when it comes down to it, at the end of 2020, when it comes down to it, and even the most blinkered Brexiteers in governments, including Boris Johnson himself, realise that actually they're not going to get this deal. They are going to be stuck, because obviously if there's not enough time now to actually prepare for the no deal, there certainly isn't enough time then. In theory, you could say, well, they're going to have to arrange for a transition period extension very hastily. The problem is it's not an insurmountable problem, but it is a problem. He's legislated specifically, or he is doing, hasn't gone through the Lords yet, but he's legislating to make it difficult for Parliament to do that. Now, it's not impossible. He's trying to bill it as he's made it so that it's illegal to seek an extension to the transition period. That's not wholly true, because at the end of the day, coming up with a law that constrains Parliament is a little bit silly. Because Parliament makes laws, repeals laws, amends laws. So if you put a law in place that says Parliament can't do this thing, and that's fine while Parliament doesn't want to do that thing anyway, which is the state of the play at the moment. But then if at some point Parliament decides it wants to do a thing, It'll just look at that law and go, we're going to change that, or just get rid of it altogether. In this case, it's change it because it'll be part of the withdrawal bill, and they'll just change it so that they can do that thing. And it's really that simple. But not necessarily a quick thing. So, given that the end of 2020 is going to be when Parliament is off for its Christmas break, he's going to have to come to that conclusion before, around about November time. But anyway, on to the next one. Now, it says this one, I'm going to agree and disagree with this one. It says, Johnson is just a frontman, puppet's mouthpiece. If you put him in a room on his own and ask questions about his future policies, direction, etc., he wouldn't know. He's carefully managed. So, the idea that Boris Johnson isn't really coming up with policies, that other people are dictating those to him, and he's just passing those on to the public, that, yes, I go along with that. That makes perfect sense because, but not, I don't come to that conclusion just because of who he is, the fact that he's someone who doesn't, do detail. If you look at Donald Trump as a counter, Donald Trump couldn't answer questions about his own future policies or direction. But he is not carefully managed. He shoots his mouth off all the time. Boris Johnson is a similar sort of thing. He will, when he gets into his head that a policy should be done, he will do it. He won't go to Dominic Cummings going, oh, I've got this idea, Dominic, what do you think? No, he will say, this is my policy now. He just doesn't shoot his mouth off as liberally as Donald Trump, that's all. But an awful lot of those policies, yes, because the way it'll work is people will suggest things to him in a way that he'll go, oh yeah, that makes sense, and he'll go along with it. And because he's only listening to a small number of people, he's not really getting counter views. So he's not necessarily adopting sensible policies, even given that he doesn't care about doing what's best for the country. He isn't necessarily even adopting sensible policies in terms of what's best for him personally, because, and I've said this before and I will say it again, Dominic Cummings has no regard for Conservatives or the Conservative Party. He's worked with them for an awful long time because they've been in power and they've given him what he wants. I don't recall him ever working for them when they were in opposition. And when he's finished working with particular politicians, he's quite, free and easy with his condemnation of them. Rudeness in many ways. But certainly he's criticised lots of top Conservatives, including some that are in the cabinet right now, and the Conservative Party in general. He's absolutely slated those. So Boris Johnson listening and adopting anything Dominic Cummings says is fraught for danger for him personally, never mind just the country. Because Dominic Cummings wants to do what Dominic Cummings does, and he will happily throw Boris Johnson under the bus to do it as well. And Boris Johnson, if he doesn't think about things, could easily be adopting policies that are going to screw him as well. And this is one of for me, the conundrum for 2021. It's where I'm constantly shifting in terms of what I think may happen. Because on the one hand, you could look at Brexit, and we're going to look at quite a lot of more comments about Brexit in this one. And you could look at it and you could think, right, the way Boris Johnson is painting himself into a corner when it comes to these negotiations already, and they haven't even properly started, is that at the end of 2020, he is going to be forced to take us along a Brexit path that doesn't even smooth out the edges. Brexit was never going to be good for us. But in actual fact, if Brexit is worse than staying in the EU, but you come up with the best possible Brexit you can actually persuade people that things are better. A lot of people don't really pay attention to the global view of the country. So you can persuade people that things are better, even if they're not better for them personally. Whereas, if you end up with as we were saying in the previous comment, you're not preparing for the worst effects of Brexit. And more especially if they take you by surprise. If Boris Johnson has in his head this idea of what the end of 2020 is going to bring, and it ends up being something completely different, it'll take him by surprise. He won't be prepared for it. And if that means allowing all the worst effects of Brexit to happen, which he didn't believe would happen, then you get to a position where it will be undeniable no matter the lies. And I don't know which is going to happen. Are they going to take the edge off the worst effects of it and convince people things are better when actually they're worse? That's certainly his plan. Or does he not know what he's doing? And do the people around him not know what he's doing? And even Dominic Cummings, remember, he has exposed himself as being politically incompetent in the last parliament. The only reason he's now in this position of power is because actually something he said in September was correct. He said, don't worry, the opposition will make a mistake. Well, they did, but they shouldn't have done. That was the opposition's mistake, not Dominic Cummings' master plan or brilliance. So we know that Dominic Cummings doesn't always know what he's doing, particularly in the political arena. So it is entirely possible they're going down a path where the outcome is not going to be what they think it is. And in that case, it'll be very bad for everyone. This is why I didn't want a no-deal Brexit. A lot of people who are on the Remain side want a no-deal Brexit because it's the only way to give a short shock that is undeniable and wins the argument very, very quickly. I'm not interested in winning arguments if it hurts people, but at the same time, we are where we are now in it. And obviously, I now want people to be able to see it for what it is. Next one. So, about the general election, a lot of talk about mandates and will of the people, and Boris Johnson calling his government the people's government. When, as this person notes here, and this is the madness of first past the post, this is why it's such an outrageous system. The Conservatives got 43.6% of the votes and 365 seats in Parliament, which is absolutely true. Labour and the Lib Dems together got, coincidentally, 43.6% of the vote, but they got just 214 seats. And I was saying before the elections, when I was talking about, first past the post, that, when you look at the breakdown of the share of the vote compared to the number of seats, even for parties that are active in lots of seats, particularly around Great Britain, it's never quite the same proportionally. If you get a certain percentage of the vote, it doesn't mean you get that percentage of seats. It should be or as close to it as possible, but only proportional representation would get you to that. But yeah, this was a particularly bad one. It was a particularly bad one, this general election. But on one hand, you look at it and you think this is absolutely disgraceful indictment of the system, because that's the Conservatives with a massive majority with a minority of votes, and not just a small minority of votes either, as in only getting just below the minority level. But literally for Labour and the Lib Dems to have exactly the same number of people in this country that voted for them, and that they now have no power to counter the Conservatives, is not democracy. And it isn't. Democracy, everyone's vote should count for the same. Boris Johnson says in his manifesto that he's going to create a new parliamentary system, well, not so much system, but boundary changes to reduce the number of MPs and to make it so that it is one person, one vote. But that's not what will happen. He will make those boundary changes. He'll reduce the number of MPs to make it easier for him, with his minority of people voting for him, to get a bigger majority. Because the only way to get one person, one vote is proportional representation. And it's that simple. But yeah, this was a particularly bad one. And just, it's indefensible. It is quite baffling, because obviously Brexiteers look at this, because it's going to get them what they think they want. They're looking at, you're losing, you're a sore loser. We won. But isn't it interesting that those same Brexiteers, when the last Parliament returned MPs that were not going to allow this no-deal Brexit, they were not going to allow any form of Brexit, in fact, without certain safeguards, all of a sudden, that wasn't the will of the people, even though in fact, more people voted for the last Parliament than voted for this one. But no, they were traitors. Whereas this Parliament as far as they're concerned, oh no, because they were voted for by the people spoke. No. But yeah, it is the absolute nonsense of democracy in this country. And the problem is, will it ever change? At some point you have to imagine it would, but I don't know. You know, you could be talking a long time in the future. Don't imagine that just because, you know, our piss poor system has been exposed, that it will change for the, and when it does change, that it will change for the better. When it changes, if it changes, well, it's going to change in the next parliament to a certain extent. It will change according to the wishes of who's in power at the time. And the people in power right now do not have the best interests of democracy or the people in mind. If they were interested in democracy, they would look at this and go, well, we'll have a referendum. If they thought their form of Brexit was actually supported by people, it's this simple. They would have a referendum on it, but they haven't. Because they know they will lose. The ministers have said the reasoning. You know, you'll get some Brexit supporters who go, oh, there's no need, we've already had one. But you'll get some, you know, there have been Brexit ministers. You know, Jacob Rees-Mogg, very famously, when he was asked about this, he didn't bother to say anything like, oh, yeah, we've already had one, we don't need another one. He just came straight out and said it, we're not having another referendum because if we did, it would reverse the results because they know that people will not vote for it and they'll vote to remain rather than this. Next one. So, this is from you may be able to guess, from a Brexit supporter. Regarding the House of Lords, of course, are going to be scrutinising the withdrawal bill this week, and they're going to be potentially suggesting some amendments. We will see. Person here saying, let's hope that Cummings takes a knife to the Lords. Their demise is long overdue. Well, first of all, you can't abolish the House of Lords. I don't just mean because the Lords would have to vote for it. At some point, you could drive through constitutional change. With the Lords resisting, it would take a very, very long time indeed. But you cannot just get rid of the House because it is there to scrutinise the work of the House of Commons. There has to be that other chamber. It doesn't have to be an unelected chamber. You could certainly move to an elected, whatever, you wouldn't necessarily call it a House of Lords, but an elected chamber in Parliament that then scrutinises it. But be careful what you wish for, because if you did change over to there's one of two things. First of all, if let's say you abolished it and the House of Commons was the only legislative body in the country, and that therefore meant that any prime minister with a majority was literally king. You know, Boris Johnson can pretty much do what he wants, but for certain things he may have to be a bit patient. You'll move to a situation where the prime minister won't even have to be patient. Then ask yourself what happens when there's a prime minister you don't approve of. All of a sudden it'll be undemocratic, it'll be outrageous what they're doing. There should be checks, you will say. Why are there no checks? Why is there nothing to stop this person doing these outrageous things? They're only doing it because they've got a majority. Why is there no one to stop them? Because you will have wished away the thing that's there to stop them. But the other thing is, if you had another chamber that was completely elected, so like in the United States, for example, where all the different branches are elected, then let's imagine now, so this withdrawal bill was going to another chamber that was entirely elected. They would amend the hell out of it. And the reason is because at the moment the Lords will not, because they know that they're unelected, or that the bulk of them are unelected. And they know that it's not for them, it's not their place to frustrate primary legislation that was promised in a manifesto that has returned a majority government. They know that. They're not going to block the withdrawal bill. What they will amend, if they amend anything, and we don't know that they're going to amend anything, it may be that Boris Johnson does some sort of deal to get a few tweaks in. That'll be what it'll sensibly do. What they'll do is they'll look at aspects of the withdrawal bill that meets two criteria. One, is it harmful? In which case, obviously, they're going to put their beady eyes on it and consider changes. Two, was it promised in the manifesto? If the answer is no, if it's something that's harmful and it wasn't even a manifesto promise, then Boris Johnson cannot have any arguments for saying that there is a mandate for it. So those aspects of it, and I'm not saying all of those aspects because there's plenty of things in that withdrawal bill that have been changed that he did not promise to change during the election campaign. So any of those things in theory could be amended and they'd be perfectly at liberty to do so. Indeed, it would be their duty to do so. Doesn't mean to say they would make sweeping changes. They may just pick on one or two. But if it was an elected body, they would look at it and go, well, I am elected. So, it wouldn't be a situation of an unelected lord overruling an elected MP. This would be an elected lord or whatever replaces them, saying, I'm elected, I'm just as elected as you are, I don't like this, I'm changing it. So you would find, and I'm not arguing against an elected second chamber, by the way, but you would find if you had an elected second chamber that they would make many more changes. You would have much less power in the House of Commons. But then that is probably the way it should be. So I would certainly look at that. But in terms of actually just getting rid of the Lords, you can't, because it does a job, a legislative job, a constitutional job that is needed. So you can't get rid of it. You can replace it, but even that would take a long time. You could replace it, but you can't get rid of it. At the moment, the House of Lords represents a balance of power towards Boris Johnson that he doesn't deserve. Now, on Brexit, it doesn't. But remember, a lot of the Lords are sort of conservative leaning, if not conservatives themselves. So, if he were to change it to a different system, he would get much less joy from the House of Lords for other policies. It's only Brexit where they're really going to cause him any trouble at all, in fact. Next one. So, this is absolutely marvellous. I love this. Another comment from Brexit here. I like this one. Brexit, the discussion was, when is Brexit going to happen? And on February the 1st, we should all go out and keep asking the Brexiteers, so when's Brexit getting done then? When's Brexit getting done? Because Brexit's not actually going to get done February the 1st. However, if the Brexiteers wish to adopt this statement, I'll go through it. It says, Brexit means Britain exiting the European Union. From the 1st of February, we will no longer be an EU member state. That is Brexit done. Our EU membership will be over. After that, all we will have is a temporary 11-month arrangement that gives us unfettered access to the EU customs union. It's not actually true. It's not unfettered. But we will have access. We may or may not agree a free trade agreement, but that is no different from any other FTA with any other nation and is not a requirement for Brexit. Again, it's not. It is very different from any other, because over half of our trade is with that particular trading bloc. By definition, all of the others added together don't make that. But without quibbling, let's go with this. I'm actually delighted with this statement. Delighted. Because Brexit, remember, is something that's supposed to be good for Britain. Supposed to have all sorts of benefits, and those benefits have been laid out to us. Now, I was of the mind that come February the 1st, because of the transition period, we'll still be in the EU. We'll not be a member, so we don't get any say in the rules. But then again, we've not been having any say in the rules for the last few years anyway, because we haven't been engaging, even though we've had every right to do so. I mean, not to interfere, but, we should have been engaging still. But that's all we've lost. We're still in the EU because we are still part of those systems. But if you want to argue or not, I'm happy with that, because I thought it would go like this. February the 1st would come along and I'd be there going, right, where are all these benefits then? A week later I'd be going, right, where are all these benefits then? A month later, 2 months later, I'll be asking, when are these benefits coming? When are we going to get these benefits? And Brexiteers will be going, you need to wait, we're not properly out yet, we're still in the transition period. Once we're out of the transition period, then it'll all be fine. If this is the attitude of Brexiteers, if they're going to say that Brexit has been done, marvellous, marvellous. That means on the 1st of February, I should be able to see the benefits, because they are supposed to be as soon as Brexit is done. People have argued that the reason why everything's been going to hell is because we haven't done Brexit yet, because we haven't left yet. The reason why all these companies are pulling out of Britain, it's because we haven't yet. The reason why all these British companies are investing overseas and not in Britain, it's because we haven't left yet. So if on 1st of February we've left yet, right, so we should all of a sudden, all these businesses that were not sure should start announcing major plans for investments on that very day. So if this is going to be the attitude of Brexiteers, that's marvellous. It means I don't have to wait till the 1st of January 2021. I can just do it on the 1st of February 2020 and say, where are the benefits then? Where are they? Because I don't expect a factory to pop up out of nowhere, but I do expect lots of companies to announce those plans. Because if Brexit is done, then that means they know what the lay of the land is, and if it's good for Britain, then that means it's good for investment, and those investors are going to be falling over themselves or holding press conferences explaining about their major plans for expansion. We'll see. And last one for today. So regarding Boris Johnson here, believes he can have his cake and eat it. It's a terrible, I don't actually like that phrase. I know what it means. I don't like it because at the end of the day, what's the point of having cake if you can't eat it? But anyway, says he believes he can have his cake and eat it and others will deliver it so he can take the credit. It must be a result of entitled upbringing. He's in for a shock. I mean, it is. I wouldn't say it's a result of entitled upbringing because lots of people have entitled upbringing without this attitude. It is, as I've said before, an attitude entirely of his Etonian upbringing. The whole, Eton is a public school that's returned quite a lot of senior politicians over the years. And it's not academically brilliant. You do get some clever people go through it and they go on and become very, very clever people. You get some more limited people go through it. But what it is very, very good at is instilling confidence to the point where, one of the things that holds back a lot of people is they just think it can't be done, and they hold themselves back. A lot of people just hold themselves back because they think it can't be done. They think there's too many barriers in their way, not realizing that actually, first of all, some of them aren't even real. And second of all, they can climb over the ones that are. We always talk and we always try and encourage youngsters to have a can-do attitude and not give in too early. An Etonian is the extreme can-do attitude. And I'm not even going to say to the point where it's a bad thing, but when you are limited and lazy, it is a bad thing. Because, in his case, particularly in politics, it does become dangerous in politics. In certain other aspects, not so much. But in politics, it is. And it's because, and as you say there, he believes he can have his cake and eat it and others will deliver it. And that is definitely, and lots of people have said this about Boris Johnson, those who know him closely, that is his attitude. He says he wants a thing to be done, but it's for other people to solve the detail. In this case, the civil service. And he's done this before. The civil service says, that's impossible. And he will just simply say to them, you've just got the wrong attitude. He won't accept that some things are... And that is what happens when you have an extreme can-do attitude. You don't accept that anything's impossible. You just assume that people are saying it because it's difficult or they just can't see a way through or something like that, but that there is a way to do it. And sometimes that'll be true. Sometimes people may just see the enormity of a problem and just think it's impossible, and maybe it's not if you really get down to it. But some things are actually just impossible. And again, what I was alluding to earlier regarding Boris Johnson and, is he going to be in for... He is going to be in for a few shocks. We know that. I mean, when he reorganised the withdrawal agreement, there were a few times when he went to a meeting with EU officials and they said something to him that surprised him and he had to turn around. There was at least one case where I think it was Michel Barnier was explaining something to him and he had to turn around and go, is that right? What? He hasn't got a clue. He doesn't know. And he doesn't understand what's ahead of him with these negotiations either. He doesn't have a clue because, yes, he doesn't look at the detail. It's for other people to sort out. He decides policy, which is fine. I mean, that's what politicians do. It's not for politicians to say how something should be done anyway. It is for civil servants who will not only have more expertise themselves, but have access to more expertise in terms of advice. But politicians should at least heed that advice when it comes back and says, what you're asking for doesn't exist, and nor can it exist. But anyway, that's that for this week. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.